Hey guys, tonight we drift into the misty hills of ancient China, where the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and quiet wisdom. A light drizzle hangs between trees, heavy with small, dark green leaves. You're not walking quickly. The path is uneven, and it doesn't matter where it leads. All around you, steam lifts from cracked stones warmed by underground springs, and tucked somewhere between the roots of camellia bushes is the beginning of something gentle, something that will one day be called tea. This isn't a tale of conquest, grand empires, or explosive inventions. It's the slow history of water meeting leaves, again and again, for thousands of years. You won't find sword fights here, just the occasional monk whispering to a kettle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you feel like it. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where our sleepy little caravan stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here now, somewhere in the Yunnan Highlands, the year it doesn't matter. Nothing moves fast. Nothing needs to. The mountain mist kisses your cheeks as your fingers brush the waxy edge of a wild tea leaf. You aren't harvesting, just touching. In these early centuries, somewhere around 2000 BCE, tea hasn't yet been invented. It simply grows, quietly, patiently, like it knows its time will come. At this point in history, humans have already been boiling water for centuries, mostly to make it safe. This is long before fancy cups and hour-long infusions. If people drink tea at all, it's probably more by accident than ceremony. Just leaves tossed into soup or brewed alongside herbs for illness. But the plant is here, silently waiting. Its Latin name, Camellia sinensis, won't appear for millennia. For now, it's just the bitter leaf bush with hidden comfort inside. You squat beside a cluster of the bushes. The leaves glisten under your touch. They're tougher than you expected, thick, resilient, with tiny serrations along the edge. They don't shout for attention like flowers do. They just persist. Maybe that's why tea will become such a companion to quiet moments. Not far away, you hear the faint sound of water hitting stone. A spring bubbles down the slope, cool and constant. In time, this spring will feed kettles, fill clay pots, and steep thousands of gatherings. But for now, it's just water doing what it does, moving at its own rhythm, ignoring the modern world entirely. Back then, no one had a standardized way of brewing tea. There were no tiny cups, no carved trays, no poetic scripts, just leaves and heat and the occasional curious sip. Most people treated tea like a bitter medicine, something to chew on during long journeys, or brew up to chase away chills. One quirky tidbit from early tea use involves chewing the raw leaves themselves, an intense experience. The astringency was mouth-puckering, like nature's way of asking, "Are you sure about this?" Yet some persisted, as maybe because chewing those leaves left a faint sense of alertness, a wakefulness that was subtle but real. Historians still argue whether tea's earliest use was recreational or medicinal, though it's likely it straddled both categories. You stretch your legs and look out over the mist-wrapped landscape. Somewhere to your left, a monkey screeches from a treetop. To your right, a wild pheasant scuttles through the underbrush. But mostly, there is silence in these early days. Tea is not yet a symbol. It holds no status. It's a plant among plants. But something about it, something in its bitterness and transformation when heated, will make it different. And you, in this quiet corner of ancient China, are brushing fingertips against the future without even realizing it. Centuries from now, emperors will sip tea steeped from these same hills. Scholars will write entire essays on a single variety's aftertaste. Potters will mold cups designed to cool exactly as quickly as thoughts do. But for now, it's just leaves in the fog, waiting. There's something soothing about that, knowing that the world's great comforts can begin so unimpressively, not with fire or bronze or war, but with a bush in the mist, simply existing. You shift your weight on the damp stone and take one last look at the camellia trees. Then you start walking again, downhill now, toward steam, toward the earliest stories, toward an emperor whose stomach was, quite literally, see-through. You arrive beneath a modest pavilion, shaded by bamboo and ringed with flat stones arranged in no particular pattern. The air smells like wet moss, boiled herbs, and burnt wood, and in the middle of it all sits Shen Nong, half legend, half emperor, fully transparent. No, really. According to ancient Chinese myth, Shen Nong had a glass-like belly. His intestines and stomach were visible through his skin, which, if true, would have made dinner conversations especially awkward. But tonight, it serves a narrative purpose, you see. Shen Nong wasn't just any ruler. He was the divine agricultural god, credited with inventing farming tools, discovering medicinal herbs, and, most importantly for our sleepy little story, accidentally discovering tea. You sit beside him. He doesn't seem to mind. His kettle is already over the fire, and the water bubbles at a steady roll. Shen Nong, according to stories, recorded in texts like the Sheneng Benkao Jing, had a habit of testing herbs by boiling them, sipping them, and watching how they affected his see-through organs. Very scientific, very unsettling. On this particular afternoon, somewhere around 2737 BCE, the wind supposedly carried a few dry leaves from a nearby bush into his boiling pot. Rather than fish them out, he let them steep. The water turned amber. The scent was strangely pleasant. He drank. His organs didn't explode. In fact, he felt oddly clear-headed. And so, legend claims, tea was born by accident, by wind, by a man who made digestion everyone's business. Is that exactly how it happened? Historians still argue whether the Shen Nong tale has any basis in reality or is purely mythological scaffolding for a more complicated truth. After all, tea's use likely evolved over centuries, quietly, among countless hands. But myths have their place, especially sleepy ones involving leaves and see-through emperors. As you lean back against a smooth bamboo post, Shen Nong continues his experiments. Next to him is a pile of crushed roots, a few crushed berries, and something that might be dried scorpion. You decide to stick with the tea. The fire crackles softly. It's fed by thin branches gathered from the surrounding hills, and it smells sweet, almost fruity. You glance again at the tea. There's no cup, just a clay ladle resting against the pot. You lift it, sip, and suddenly, the steam, the warmth, the bitter aftertaste, it all makes sense. What you're drinking isn't just flavored water. It's process, intention. It's the act of pausing long enough to notice a leaf and wondering what it might become when it meets heat. Even now, centuries before the Tang or Song dynasties will codify the art of tea. There's a ritual forming here, not in complex steps, but in the feeling that something meaningful has happened simply because you didn't rush through it. You let your eyes rest. Nearby, a cicada buzzes with unwavering persistence. Shen Nong makes a small note in a scroll using a bamboo brush. You're not sure what he's writing, but you like to imagine it says something humble, like leaves hot water, not deadly, possibly delightful. A quirky detail some historians note is that Shen Nong supposedly discovered hundreds of herbs this way, and according to myth, Yixie's tea was the one that revived him after he poisoned himself with a particularly aggressive root, kind of like a botanical reset button. You imagine Shen Nong doing a lot of coughing and muttering, not that one several times a week. The steam from the kettle curls around your face. Your hands grow warm for a few moments. The world outside the pavilion disappears, and it's just you, the myth, and the scent of possibility. Though the story of Shen Nong has been softened with age and repetition, it carries a seed of truth. Tea likely entered Chinese culture, not with fanfare, but through curiosity. Through someone, maybe many someones, wondering how to make bitterness into comfort, how to make a moment into a habit, how to turn steeped leaves into calm. You finish your cup. Shen Nong nods without looking up. He's already moved on to his next test, his belly a quiet window into early pharmacology. You rise slowly, stretch your legs, and begin walking again. There's more to see, more steam in the distance, because what began here as a happy accident will soon reshape cities, conversations, and centuries of daily life, one careful pour at a time. You follow the slope downward, and time itself changes. The trees thin, the mist lightens. When your feet touch stone-paved streets instead of earth, you realize you've landed in the Tang dynasty. It's somewhere in the 700s CE, and the world of tea has become much louder, but still in that particular Chinese way, where even the noise knows how to be quiet. You're in the capital, Chang'an, one of the most cosmopolitan cities on earth at the time. Markets teem with spices, silk, and scrolls. Courtyards echo with soft music from stringed instruments. But tonight, you ignore the incense sellers and fortune tellers. You're headed somewhere different, a place newer, but already essential, the tea house. Tea, once chewed, boiled crudely, or slapped onto medicine lists, has transformed. It's no longer just utilitarian. It's ritual. It's social glue. It's how conversations begin, how pauses become meaningful, how status is negotiated without speaking. You step through the lacquered doorway of a small tea house just outside the city wall, and the change in mood is immediate. The room is dim. Lanterns glow softly behind paper screens. No one speaks above a murmur. A few men in robes sit with folded fans resting beside them. One woman quietly paints something onto her teacup with a brush dipped in water. You think she's pretending to be poetic, but the cup is still damp. It will vanish soon. You sit. A server with padded footsteps approaches with a tray. On it, pressed tea in tight green bricks. This was the preferred method in Tang times. Compress the leaves, shave them off, Boil with salt. Yes, salt. Don't look at the server like that. In the Tang Dynasty, tea wasn't always sweet or floral. The preferred preparation could involve onion skins, orange peel, or even scallions. Think less afternoon tea and more savory broth with personality. You try a sip, it's not bad. Weird, but not bad. You're not alone. Scholars come here to drink and debate the latest poetry. Clerks drop by between scroll copying shifts. Sometimes, court officials slide in wearing casual robes, just to pretend they're not exhausted by politics. The tea house has become the great equalizer, in a way. It's a prelude to modern coffee shops, except instead of tapping on laptops, people here scribble poems on fans or argue over Tang Dynasty rhyme schemes. A quirky tidbit, this was also the age of Lu Yu, author of the Cha Jing, or the classic of tea. You spot him, or maybe someone pretending to be him, at a back table. He's scribbling obsessively, muttering about leaf shape and their ideal mountain spring. He's the kind of man who would swirl water around inside a pot and then throw it away for being the wrong temperature. His book, often cited as the first known tea manual, lays out not just how to prepare tea, but how to think about it. He details water quality snowmelt is best, utensil care, and the importance of proper mood. He's turning tea into philosophy. Historians still argue whether Lu Yu intended to spiritualize tea or simply categorize it. But either way, his work gives the drink a backbone, and you feel it, sitting here, even though your own cup tastes vaguely like onion soup. Behind you, someone begins playing a guqin, the strings barely louder than your breath. You glance around. No one seems stressed. Even the server wiping down trays does so with the kind of methodical rhythm that suggests I will never, ever rush for you. And that's the point. You sip again. This time, slower. Maybe the salt isn't so strange after all. Maybe it brings out the vegetal notes. Or maybe your tongue's just giving up. Either way, you settle into the moment. The Tang Tea House isn't just about tea. It's about time, about how it's folded and steeped, just like the bricks on your tray. You could leave whenever, but you don't. Outside, the sun has set. The city is glowing in that low, fire-lit way that looks like a dream half remembered. You watch the steam rise from your cup and realize it's the same steam that curled around Shen Nong's kettle. The leaves have changed, the tools have changed, but the quiet, that part's eternal. You stand and bow slightly to the others. No one reacts, which, in a tea house like this, is probably the deepest form of approval. You're in the back room of a modest Tang home now, far from the city bustle. A brazier glows with dull heat in one corner. There's a small table beside you, short, worn smooth by countless elbows and quiet evenings. On it, a collection of tools, a copper whisk, a jade-handled knife, a shallow bowl the color of aged bone, and beside that, what looks like a rectangular block of mossy chocolate. It isn't. It's a brick of tea. Compressed tea bricks, dark, dense, often adorned with stamped designs, are the favored format of the era. They're practical, easy to store, easy to trade, hard to crush in transit. Tonight, you're going to prepare one the Tang way, which means scraping, boiling, whisking, and possibly, if you're lucky, understanding why anyone found this relaxing. You pick up the knife. Its blade is dull, more for shaving than slicing. You gently carve off a few thin flakes from the tea brick. They fall like dry paint chips into the bronze pot already warming over the brazier. You add water, a pinch of salt, then you wait. Whisking isn't a casual step here, it's central. You lift the bamboo whisk, its bristles fine and straight. As the water warms, you begin stirring in slow, rhythmic motions. The mixture foams lightly, releasing aromas that are earthy, roasted, and vaguely medicinal. This form of tea, frothy, salted, cooked, is a far cry from the clear, steeped infusions you may know today. But in its day, it was high art. The goal wasn't clarity, it was transformation, turning brittle flakes into warmth, bitter dust into liquid ceremony. A surprising detail some Tang tea gatherings turned whisking into performance. Guests would take turns and try to outdo each other's technique, like a dance made of elbows and wrists. Foam height mattered, timing mattered. Whether your guests felt soothed or nauseous by the end also mattered. Historians still argue whether the frothing obsession was practical or performative, or both. It's likely no one really needed 3 inches of foam on their tea, but when has a human tradition ever been purely logical? You continue whisking. The smell deepens. The bubbles settle into a creamy layer across the surface. You ladle some into your bowl. It's thick, like light soup. You sip. There's a roasted bitterness, followed by a lingering warmth. And there, just for a moment, something floral. It's not bad, odd, but like the tea house onion brew. It grows on you. You look around the room. There are no decorations, just tools, leaves, steam. The space is simple because the ritual is not. Every object has a purpose. Every gesture, even the most ordinary, is considered. This isn't a performance for guests. This is someone's daily quiet, and it's not limited to one class. Brick tea was everywhere, from palaces to border towns. In fact, it became so popular that tea bricks were used as currency in parts of China, Mongolia, and Tibet. One brick could buy you a chicken. A dozen could buy a modest horse. You imagine a scene in which a merchant tries to negotiate a better price by biting into his money. Your hands are still warm from the ladle. You set it down, careful not to spill a drop. That's part of it, too. The care, the slowness. You think about Shen Nong again, how he may have once brewed something this bitter and winced but drank it anyway. Curious. Here in this quiet room, you understand tea was never about thirst. It was about attention. It's why no one here gulps it, why every sip feels like punctuation instead of volume. The fire dims slightly. The whisk dries in its stand. You feel calmer than you expected, especially given how involved this all was. And when you rise, the cup is empty. The room still smells of roasted leaves and salt, and outside, night has fallen like a velvet curtain over the Tang Empire. You slip into your shoes and step into the darkness, toward another quiet doorway, and into a world where monks have already taken tea beyond the kitchen, beyond the dining room, into the depths of the spirit. You now find yourself walking along the winding paths of a mountain monastery, where ancient pines scrape the sky and the wind carries the faintest hint of incense. The air is cooler here, crisper, touched by the sound of monks chanting somewhere beyond a mossy stone wall. This is no ordinary place. It is a sanctuary where the ritual of tea has moved beyond the body and into the spirit. Buddhist monks have long valued tea, not just for its taste, but for its ability to sharpen the mind during long hours of meditation. You watch as a robed figure carefully boils water over a charcoal brazier, eyes half closed in calm focus. To them, tea is not a distraction, but a tool, a subtle aid in achieving clarity and stillness. The link between tea and meditation likely began in the Tang dynasty, but grew steadily thereafter. By the Song dynasty, tea was woven into the very fabric of monastic life. Monks found that the caffeine and bitterness helped combat drowsiness during extended periods of silence and contemplation. You imagine a sleepy monk struggling to keep his eyelids open during a 4-hour sutra reading, suddenly revived by a cup of frothy, bitter brew. Here's a quirky detail: some monasteries reportedly experimented with adding powdered tea leaves directly to water, whisking it to a foam, which is remarkably similar to the Japanese matcha tradition that would emerge centuries later. The monks might not have been aiming for tasty, but for focused alertness. Historians still debate whether tea's role in Buddhism was primarily medicinal or a carefully cultivated ritual, but either way, the results were profound. You sit beside a stone basin, the cool water reflecting fragmented sunlight. Nearby, a tiny porcelain cup is passed to you. The tea inside is strong and green, with an earthiness that hints at the mountain soil. You lift the cup slowly, appreciating the warmth spreading through your fingers. The monks perform their tea rituals with a slow precision that turns each motion into a meditation itself. Boiling water is poured just so. The whisk moves in circular patterns, creating foam that rises like a quiet wave. Each sip is savored, not swallowed. In the monastery gardens, stone lanterns stand sentinel over sculpted shrubs, and delicate bamboo fences enclose patches of tender tea plants. It's a world designed for quiet, for contemplation, for the perfect balance of taste and thought. You think back to the bustling Tang tea houses and the practical tea bricks. Here, tea is becoming something else, a bridge between the earthly and the spiritual, a moment to pause, to listen inward, to savor stillness. You take a slow breath. The scent of pine mingles with tea steam. Somewhere a bell tolls softly, marking time that feels both endless and suspended. Tea isn't just a drink here, it's a gentle companion to the mind's journey. You wonder if the monks realized that centuries later, their quiet whisking and careful brewing will inspire entire cultures and ceremonies far beyond these hills, that their patient rituals will echo in rooms filled with soft clinks and whispered sighs. As you rise to leave, the wind brushes past you, carrying with it a scattering of leaves. The mountain remains calm, the tea remains warm, and the centuries-old bond between leaf and spirit feels alive. You descend from the monastery and enter a scholar's pavilion nestled beside a slow-moving canal. The roof tiles are curved like sleeping dragons, and wind chimes shaped like petals sway in the breeze. Inside, a literatus sits cross-legged beside a low, lacquered table. His robes are ink-stained, his fingers smudged from calligraphy. But before the next poem, before another essay about rain or exile, he pours tea. You watch as he lifts a clay pot and begins his movements with exaggerated grace. It's not performative, it's part of the poetry. Every gesture is a syllable, every pour a punctuation mark. For scholars of the Song dynasty and beyond, tea has become more than refreshment. It is metaphor, it is structure, it is poetry made liquid. Tonight, you aren't just drinking, you're steeping yourself in a literary culture where tea and thought are brewed in the same pot. The scholar speaks without lifting his eyes. The best poems begin after the second cup. You aren't sure whether that's a quote, a warning, or a challenge. In this circle of literati, tea has its own vocabulary. It's no longer enough to say it's bitter or fragrant. One must comment on its mouthfeel, its cool scent that lingers at the top of the throat, its cleansing silence between sips. It's like reviewing a cloud or discussing the personality of a breeze. You try to contribute. You say the tea reminds you of wet pine needles. The scholar nods, pleased, not because you're right, but because you bothered to notice. A quirky detail floats to mind during the song period. Tea competitions were popular. Participants would brew powdered tea, yes, powdered again, and judges would assess the smoothness of foam, the strength of aroma, and whether the tea left a ring in the cup after drinking. The goal mastery of not just taste, but technique, like a talent show for introverts. You sip again. The tea is grassy, bright, slightly dry on the finish. The scholar reaches for his brush and begins writing. You peek at the page a short verse, describing how the steam rising from his cup is a staircase for lost spirits returning home. Historians still argue whether these poetic associations deepened tea's cultural value or merely added layers of performance. But for scholars like this one, the act of drinking was inseparable from the act of observing. Tea became a lens through which to consider life, time, even politics, though politely, with metaphors, and never on an empty stomach. The pavilion grows quieter. Outside, the water laps gently against carved stone embankments. You notice the way the scholar taps his teacup 3 times after sipping, a sign of gratitude, a personal habit. You copy it. Even the teaware is considered part of the poetic experience. Cups of celadon or white porcelain are prized not just for beauty, but for the way they showcase the color of the tea. The wrong glaze could ruin a mood. The right one could evoke moonlight on rice paper. You glance around. The table is scattered with other poetic detritus pine cones, river stones, a cracked gourd holding a single lotus stem. This isn't decoration, it's arrangement, another aesthetic of silence. Another pot is poured. The tea is lighter now, as if the conversation itself has steeped the leaves softer. You talk about clouds, about exile, about how the best teas grow in places difficult to reach, and when the last sip vanishes from your cup. The scholar says nothing. He simply sets the pot aside, nods once, and returns to his brush. You bow slightly as you rise. The poetry isn't finished, but for now, it's steeped enough. You're standing now at the foot of an enormous wooden gate carved with twisting dragons and plum blossoms. A pair of guards glance at you, then nod you through, not because you belong, but because in this dreamlike scroll of history, you're invisible when you need to be. You step into a courtyard of near silence, imperial silence around you. Low marble walls contain a manicured garden of river stones, miniature pine trees, and carefully placed moss patches. In the center, a raised platform shaded by silk awnings holds a tea table of jade and gold. This is the palace, not the whole of it, just the corner reserved for the imperial tea ceremony, where the tea itself is tribute, and every gesture is rehearsed as if history were watching. You're about to witness a performance for the emperor, not a play, but a steeping, and everything here matters: the temperature of the water, the origin of the leaves, the pattern in which the steam rises. That last one isn't a joke. Tribute tea was a serious affair. Provinces were expected to send their best leaves, delicately plucked from designated mountains, hand-rolled, dried under specific conditions, and sealed in ornate containers that sometimes cost more than the tea itself. A failure in quality could be seen as an insult to the throne. You imagine a provincial governor anxiously sniffing a teapot, wondering if it smells enough like honor. A servant steps forward and kneels at the table. She lifts a lacquered box with both hands and opens it slowly to reveal fine powder, tribute grade tea, pale green and shimmering slightly in the light. The emperor won't make the tea himself. Of course, that task falls to the court tea master, who now approaches in robes as still as parchment. The master begins. First, he warms the porcelain bowl. Then he whisks the tea into hot water using strokes that resemble calligraphy. The resulting foam is even, bright, with no large bubbles. That part is crucial, according to manuals from the Song court. Irregular bubbles were not only unaesthetic, they were offensive. A quirky detail here: some records suggest that tea masters were trained to read steam, not like fortune telling, but aesthetically, commenting on the way it drifted, how quickly it disappeared, and whether it was modest or too proud. You wonder what that would look like. You try not to giggle. Historians still argue whether these rituals were truly spiritual or just political theater. But standing here, surrounded by golden lattice screens and a silence so deep it feels embroidered, you realize it can be both. The emperor finally lifts the cup. He does not speak. He sips. The silence stretches until he sets it down. A single nod, approval, which, in this setting, might as well be thunderous applause. You're ushered out silently, through a corridor lined with paintings of mountain teas, each from a different region, each gifted to the throne like a liquid poem of loyalty. Some of the paintings have faded with time, but the reverence remains, even far from the monastery or the scholar's retreat. The essence of tea has not changed. It is still quiet, still careful, still shaped by those who believe that a single sip can represent an entire province. Outside the palace walls, the wind has picked up. Plum blossoms drift down like soft punctuation marks. You catch one, let it go. Somewhere behind you, another pot is being poured, not for an emperor this time, just for someone who needs the warmth. The world grows smaller now, quieter again, as you step away from the grand scale of palaces and into the humble rhythm of everyday life. You're standing in a potter's workshop in Jiangsu province, surrounded by soft clay and the slow, sure hands of someone shaping something timeless. This is where the teapot quietly changes everything. Yixing clay. It's purple-brown, unglazed, and doesn't look like much at first. But this clay, porous, breathable, and patient, will revolutionize how tea is made, poured, and understood. You lean in close as the potter presses a lump onto the wheel. His foot taps the treadle. The wheel spins, and slowly, from the center, a tiny vessel begins to rise. In earlier centuries, Tea was either boiled in open pots or whisked into bowls, but somewhere between the late Song and Ming dynasties, steeping, what we now call infusing, takes center stage, and the yixing pot becomes its perfect companion. You lift a finished one, small enough to sit in your palm. It feels warm, almost alive, because it is, in a way. These pots absorb flavor over time, brew the same tea in them again and again, and the clay remembers, eventually. Even clear water poured into a well seasoned yixing pot will hint at the tea it once knew. You set it down gently, suddenly respectful. A quirky detail serious tea drinkers would sometimes retire their pots after decades of use, not discard, but honor them as if the pot had grown too wise to keep serving. Some even gave them names. One pot, found in a Qing household archive, was called Quiet Companion. You step into the back garden, where a kettle rests over coals. A potter's daughter offers you a cup made just moments ago with one of her father's pieces. The tea inside is oolong, fragrant, woodsy, layered. It's been steeped, not boiled or whisked, and something about that, about the way the leaves dance in water, then sink, feels incredibly modern. Historians still argue whether the yixing pot evolved specifically to suit oolong tea, or whether oolong evolved to flatter the pot. Either way, it's a happy marriage. You can taste it in every slow pour. The ceremony that emerges around these pots isn't fussy, it's intimate. Gongfu tea, meaning skillful tea, develops in southern China as a practice of care and attention. Small pots, small cups, multiple steepings. It's not about getting full, it's about getting quiet. You pour your own now. The lid clicks softly as you lift it. You watch the leaves unfurl, a little more with each infusion. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just slowly, like a stretch after a nap. The teapot in your hand is more than functional. It's a reminder of patience, of repetition, of how warmth, time, and silence can transform even the bitterest leaf into something comforting. You pour again, this time, without looking. Your hands already know the motion. The steam rises in a ribbon. The clay darkens slightly from the heat, and for a moment, the world holds its breath. No palace, no poetry, no politics, just this, a pot, a leaf, a pour. You drink. The flavor is softer now. The pot remembers, and so do you. You're crouched now beside a dusty shelf in a quiet scholar's home, somewhere in the Ming dynasty. The room smells like sandalwood and dried ink, and your fingers brush against brittle bamboo scrolls and paper-bound books stacked with the care of someone who trusts quiet objects more than people. These are tea manuals, dozens of them, some copied by hand, others printed with woodblocks, all devoted to one thing: tea, its water, its preparation, its cups, its temperament, its mood. You blink. That's a lot of writing about leaves. The obsession is real. Some of the earliest tea texts were written to guide proper behavior. Others function more like deeply opinionated diary entries. One argues that the best water comes from the middle of a fast-flowing stream, collected on a cloudy day in early spring. Another insists that only snow melted in earthen pots gives tea its true voice. You open one manual slowly. The calligraphy is delicate, looping like smoke trails. It begins with a reflection on timing, not steeping time, but seasonal timing. Tea, the author warns, should not be drunk during heavy rains or when the wind carries the scent of decaying leaves. It will cloud the flavor. And, more importantly, the heart. A quirky footnote. One Ming era tea critic wrote an entire essay comparing the personalities of different tea leaves to famous generals from the Three Kingdoms period. You find a line that reads, "This leaf is gallant, but burns out early, like Le Boux." You chuckle. So apparently, even in the 1500s, people had strong opinions about overhyped blends. You boil water on a brazier, referencing a guide that details the 5 stages of boiling: shrimp eyes, crab eyes, thread of pearls, dragon boil, and finally, old man's beard. It sounds ridiculous until you see it. The water truly does change, first with small popping bubbles, then roiling silver waves. You pull it off at the thread of pearls stage. You don't want your leaves scolded. Historians still argue whether these levels of detail were widespread or reserved for elite circles. But the manuals suggest a deeper truth that people, even long ago, found joy in the tiniest refinements. That stillness was a discipline. That taste could be a kind of study. You pour. The cup is tiny, cracked slightly at the rim. You don't mind. The tea is light yellow, almost clear. You sip. It's astonishingly smooth, not flashy, not floral, just a quiet unfolding. You flip through another manual. This one contains sketches, diagrams of ideal kettle shapes, comparisons of steeping methods. A comically grumpy looking man beside the caption. Do not drink if your mind is clouded. These guides weren't just about tea. They were about how to drink tea. The attitude, so the space, the pacing. You imagine a Ming scholar, frustrated by court politics, retreating to his study not to escape, but to reset. One steeping at a time. Outside, you hear a bamboo wind chime. The air has cooled. You set the manual aside and refill your cup. You are now, according to one scroll, in the third steeping of the 4th hour, which apparently is the moment when memory loosens and insight drips through. The room is dim. The scrolls rest like sleeping cats. You understand something now. The manuals weren't about perfection. They were about devotion, to silence, to method, to the gentle thrill of getting the smallest thing exactly right. You drink your last sip slowly. The old man in the sketch might still disapprove, but you feel calm, even wise. You blow out the candle, still holding the warmth of the cup in your hands. You find yourself stepping onto a smooth stone path lined with jasmine shrubs and flowering hibiscus. The walls around you are low and whitewashed, the roof tiles curved, the air heavy with late spring warmth. You're in a private courtyard now, tucked behind a modest but elegant home. Laughter bubbles softly behind a bamboo screen. This is a women's tea gathering, and you're invited to quietly observe. Inside, silk slippers shift on lacquered floorboards. A small group of women sit in a circle, each dressed in pastel robes with embroidered cuffs, peonies, cranes, lotuses. Their hair is pinned with jade, coral, or simple lacquered wood. There is no host, not really. The teapot is their center. Tea has long held space in women's lives. For some, it was a quiet retreat. For others, a platform to exchange stories, gossip, poems, or news not quite meant for men's ears. You sit down near the edge, unnoticed. The pot on the table is Yixing clay, modest in design. Next to it, fine cups no bigger than walnut shells. The woman nearest the pot pours with confidence, not flourish. The leaves fall, the water swirls, the scent rises, roasted, floral, familiar, and with that, the conversations resume softly at first, then flowing like river water over polished stones. One speaks of her daughter's clumsy brushwork. Another shares a story about her husband's awkward dinner with a provincial official. A third begins reciting a poem she penned at dawn, inspired by the way steam curled from her morning cup. Here's a quirky detail in some regions during the Ming and Qing periods. Women developed informal tea languages, code phrases built around pouring and sipping. A full cup handed without eye contact might mean you've said enough. A half-filled one offered with a smile might mean go on, I'm listening. Historians still argue whether these tea circles were acts of subtle rebellion or merely social continuity, but their value is evident within these walls. Women shaped ideas, shared strategies, and carved out emotional spaces rarely acknowledged in the official histories. You sip your cup. It's delicate, scented with osmanthus, light gold in color, but heavy with intent. The woman beside you smiles briefly, not a welcome, a knowing. The kettle is reboiled, the cup's rinsed. The rhythm continues. Pour, pass, pause, pour again. Between sips, someone begins humming a lullaby. It's the kind of melody that doesn't need words, just the hush of steam and the warmth of shared silence. One of the women pulls a small embroidered pouch from her sleeve. Inside are dried tea leaves wrapped in a silk scrap. From Fujian, she says, handing it to another guest. For your sister's nerves, a small, whispered act of care. You realize, sitting here, that tea isn't just a ceremony, it's a system of support, of slowness, of reclaiming time in a world that rushes past. These women don't need grand rituals, they've made their own. As the afternoon sun filters through lattice windows, the group grows quieter, one by one. Cups are drained, hairpins adjusted, stories tucked away like folded handkerchiefs. You stand, quietly, no need for farewells. The teapot has already said everything. The path turns now, worn smooth beneath your feet, as you pass through a wooden gate and into a scholar's garden. This isn't a public space. It's hidden behind a residence, encircled by brush fences and curved stone walls that guide your gaze downward to the details. The still pond, the patterned gravel, the perfectly placed rock that looks both accidental and entirely intentional. You're not here to marvel at size. This garden is small, but in its silence, it expands, and at its heart, as expected, there is tea. A scholar kneels by a stone table under a flowering crabapple tree. His robes are loose, his hair tied high, and beside him, no guests, no servants, just a tray, a pot, and a set of 4 cups. He gestures for you to join him, though you speak no words. None are needed. Gongshi, scholars' rocks, stand like mountains among the moss, jagged, twisted, with holes that wind whistles through. They were collected not for symmetry, but for spirit, and in a way, they reflect the tea being poured subtle, unpredictable, shaped by time. You sit and take the first cup. It is pale amber, the leaves, long and wiry, floats gently at the top before sinking in a quiet spiral. The scent is warm hay, toasted rice, maybe apricot, the flavor deeper than the color suggests. The scholar pours again, slower this time. The second steeping is softer, rounder. He taps a fan gently against his knee and watches the water ripple in a shallow stone basin. The tea, the rocks, the garden all speak the same language: stillness, intention, space. A quirky practice emerges here. Some scholars would conduct tea tastings not by comparing flavors, but by discussing the emotional character of the brew. One record from the late Ming period describes a guest who proclaimed, "This cup is lonely, but dignified." Another declared his tea reminds me of a tree that refused to bloom, but still survived the frost. Dramatic, yes, but entirely sincere. Historians still argue whether these elaborate interpretations were genuine spiritual experiences or simply a kind of refined bragging, a way of proving one's sensitivity to taste and silence. But when you're here, sipping the third steeping while a breeze stirs the bamboo behind you, it doesn't feel performative. It feels real. You stand and explore the garden. Each stone is placed for asymmetry. The paths loop but never truly end. There are no fountains, no statues, just textures: moss, bark, water, leaf. In the corner, there's a low platform set with another teapot, this one smaller, reddish brown, its spout thin as a bird's beak. Next to it, a single line of calligraphy on a hanging scroll: empty cup, full heart. You don't need to understand the brushstrokes to understand the message. Tea here isn't served, it's shared, not in quantity, but in mood, in breath, in how long someone takes before pouring the next cup. As the light shifts, shadows lengthen across the whitewashed wall. The scholar rises, bows his head, and vanishes through a bamboo grove. You remain for a moment longer, listening to the hush of leaves. The fourth steeping has gone cool in your cup, but the flavor is still there, soft, persistent, like memory. You walk on, not hurried, not searching, just carrying the stillness with you, steeped into your bones. You drift now into a town far from palaces and scholar gardens. There are no marble courtyards here, no jade pots or delicate scrolls, just a dirt path lined with carts, a few wooden stools, and the scent of something deeply familiar: tea, again. But this time, it's not refined, it's honest, it's for everyone. A woman pours hot water from a dented kettle into a battered clay cup. A farmer, his sleeves rolled and his face dusted with road grit, nods in thanks and takes the cup with both hands. You take a seat beside him. No one looks twice. You're just another guest at this roadside stall. Tea in this setting is stripped of all ornament. No whisking, no poetry, just heat, leaf, and rest. And yet, something about it still carries the same calm. Across the centuries, tea traveled far beyond scholars and monks. It settled into village homes, into the hands of porters and fishermen, market women and herders. It became both a luxury and a comfort, something for court and countryside alike. You take a sip. It's strong, slightly smoky. There's grit in the bottom of the cup. It doesn't matter. The woman behind the kettle, her hair wrapped in a faded cloth, her hands scarred from years of heat, refills your cup without a word. She's already turned to the next customer, who's holding a yoke of firewood and asking if there's time for one quick steeping before the ferry leaves. Here's a quirky tradition in some tea stalls. A customer could pay for their own cup and leave enough for the next stranger. It became known as passing the steam, an invisible hand of generosity. No record, No name, just trust, carried in clay. Historians still argue whether these everyday rituals shaped tea culture more than the elaborate ceremonies we document. Perhaps the quiet pause of a merchant sipping beside a farmer held just as much meaning as the emperor's curated foam. Perhaps more. Your seat wobbles slightly as someone walks past. The crowd grows a little louder. A dog wanders beneath the table, searching for dropped rice. Across from you, a boy blows on his tea with exaggerated puffs, trying to act grown up. Everyone's in motion, but the cups are still. You realize that in spaces like this. Tea isn't just about taste, it's about pace, about claiming a moment, about not rushing, even when the road demands it. You pay for your cup and leave a little extra for the next one, you say softly, and the woman nods without looking. The fire crackles under the kettle again. The steam keeps rising. As you walk away, you glance back. The stall is still there. Cups clink. People laugh. And in the background, the kettle whistles softly, just as it has for years, and just as it will tomorrow. Tea endures, not because it's grand, but because it fits into every hand, every place, every kind of silence. The road bends again, and this time it carries you not deeper into China, but across the water. A salted wind brushes your face, and the sky is clouded with early morning mist. You're on a wooden vessel, a monk's robes billowing beside you as the coastline of Japan slowly rises on the horizon. In his pack is more than just prayer beads and scrolls. There is tea, powdered, carefully wrapped, guarded like a sacred text. He doesn't speak, but when he does, it's to the leaves. The monk's name might be Isai, or perhaps he's just one of many who followed the tide of spiritual exchange between Tang China and Kamakura Japan. Either way, he brings more than religion. He brings a ritual. You step off the boat with him, the sand soft underfoot, and soon you're climbing temple steps. The wood is dark with age. The bell tolls slowly. Inside, a small gathering of monks prepares water, not for soup, not for washing, but for something new, a ceremony that echoes what was once practiced in those misty Chinese mountains. They call it Chanoyu, or simply the tea ceremony. At this early stage, it's not yet the choreographed art form it will become. It's still fluid, adapting Chinese brewing techniques into Japanese thought. But the intention is the same: stillness, focus, repetition, and the beauty of things done carefully. You kneel as a bowl is offered. It's wide, rough at the rim. The tea is whisked to a frothy green foam. The scent is seaweed, pine, and earth. It's not Chinese tea exactly. It's not meant to be. It's transformation. A quirky detail here: when tea first arrived in Japan, it was so unfamiliar that some thought it medicinal, others mystical. Early adopters sometimes called it liquid Zen, and in temples, it became essential, offered before meditation, used in prayerful silence. Even the whisk, the chasen, became a symbol of discipline. Historians still argue whether Japanese tea ceremony evolved as a direct continuation of Chinese monastic traditions, or whether it bloomed independently with only distant roots. Either way, the resemblance is clear, so is the divergence. In Japan, the tea ceremony begins to emphasize aesthetic form. Rooms are built to guide the gaze. Utensils are chosen for their seasonal appropriateness. Silence isn't just allowed, It's cultivated. You sip again. The bowl is heavier than expected. The foam leaves a ring around the inner wall, like the echo of a thought. The monk bows. You bow back. Outside, a tiny garden has been arranged with stones, moss, and a single pine. The path is curved, not to confuse, but to slow you, so you don't rush toward tea. You arrive by degrees. You walk the path again, inside the temple. The next monk begins his preparations. The water is poured from a bamboo ladle. The whisk moves in practiced arcs. Another bowl is born, another moment honored. And you understand now that what crossed the sea wasn't just leaves or tools, but a rhythm, a way of paying attention, one that will continue to unfold across centuries, between cultures, one pore at a time. You return now to the mainland, but the world you step into is no longer untouched. The soil feels different. The roads are busier. A strange new tension hums beneath the surface. You're in the 18th century, and the traders have arrived. Ships from Britain, Portugal, and the Netherlands crowd the harbors. Their heels creak with ambition. Their ledgers demand tea, not ceremony, not poetry, just volume. And suddenly, the quiet culture of steeped leaves finds itself at the heart of a global storm. You're in a port town, perhaps Canton, where massive crates are being loaded by sweating dock workers under the watchful eye of foreign merchants. The tea inside is packed tightly, labeled in English, destined for markets that have never known a proper second steeping. To them, tea is commodity. To you, it's still comfort. You duck into a side alley, away from the shouts and coin clinks. There, a tea house still holds its breath. Inside, the kettle hums. The pot is clay. The leaves are oolong, rolled tightly, carefully unfurling in the pot as if refusing to be rushed. You sit, and the tea is poured without a word. But even here, there is a shadow. Prices are rising. Some teas are being grown not for flavor, but for yield. Merchants bargain with hard faces. Gardens are mapped by surveyors who know nothing of terroir, but everything about taxation. Here's a quirky piece of the puzzle during this tea fever. Smugglers and traders sometimes tried to replicate Chinese teas back home, creating strange imitations using blackthorn, sloe, or even dyed leaves. One recipe for counterfeit tea involved boiling leaves with iron filings and sheep dung to achieve the desired oxidized look. Appetizing. Historians still argue whether these foreign incursions permanently diluted Chinese tea culture or merely forced it to grow sideways. But in this moment, you feel it bending, not breaking, just shifting. The imperial court begins to regulate tea exports tightly. Specialized factories arise to process tea specifically for export, different from the tender leaves reserved for local cups. Tea becomes a matter of state, of pride, of power, and yet, beneath all this movement, the rituals persists. You return to the table. The man beside you lifts his pot and begins a gong fu pour. Small cups, slow timing. His thumb rotates the lid just slightly to let the aroma bloom. He doesn't look up. He doesn't speak. But his movements say this is ours. You sip. The flavor is familiar, floral, with a whisper of roast. Nothing showy, just patient, just enduring. Outside, crates continue to thud onto decks, tea heads to London, to Boston, to Amsterdam. But here, behind this wooden screen, time moves differently, slowly, with intention. You rise quietly, the cup is empty, the tea house breathes, the The trade winds blow, and the culture, despite everything, stays steeped in stillness. You're sitting now in a small modern tea room, not in a palace or a temple or a poet's moonlit garden, but somewhere ordinary. There's a narrow window, a low wooden shelf lined with clay teapots, and soft lo-fi music playing in the background. A young woman adjusts the lighting, making sure the room glows just warm enough. This is not a recreation of ancient ceremony. It's not a nostalgia act. It's gong fu tea, alive, practiced, and quietly thriving in the 21st century. She places a kettle on the induction plate. Steam curls upward in that familiar, timeless way. You sit across from her at a table barely big enough for the tray. The cups and the shared silence. The pot is yixing. The leaves are dankong. The movements are muscle memory. Rinse the leaves. Warm the cups. Let the first steeping wake everything up. No rush. No talking yet. Gong Fu Cha, making tea with skill, has seen a revival in recent years. Not as a museum piece, but as something very much alive. Younger generations across China and beyond are returning to it not because it's fashionable, but because it slows time. It makes room. It reminds them to breathe. Here's a quirky fact. Modern tea rooms sometimes offer steeping sessions with paired soundtracks, some traditional, some ambient, even minimalist techno. The goal is the same: create space for the water and the leaves to speak. Historians still argue whether today's Gong Fu culture is a true continuation of its Ming and Qing roots, or a reinterpretation shaped by contemporary values. But as your hostess tips the pot and the tea flows in a thin, steady arc, you realize it doesn't matter. The second steeping arrives. It's richer, warmer, the floral notes deepening. She smiles, but doesn't comment. The tea does all the speaking. You glance around. The walls are bare but clean. A single scroll hangs behind the kettle. Just one character Jing, meaning quiet. The room could be anywhere Shanghai, Taipei, London, even Toronto. The leaves, the pots, the stillness, they travel better than borders. You ask a question, not out loud, just with your eyes, your pause between sips. She nods and answers, also without speaking. This is the modern tea ceremony, not encoded in textbooks, not tied to any one religion or social class, just presence, just rhythm, just the kind of attention the world rarely asks of you anymore. You reach for the last cup. The warmth settles into your palms. You smell the steam before you sip. It reminds you of something: mountain rain, a mossy room, a scholar's brush dipped in early spring water. You smile, because somehow, in this quiet room, with plastic light switches and a Bluetooth speaker humming, you feel closer than ever to that misty forest where it all began. The pot is empty. The leaves have unfurled, and outside, the world continues at its usual speed. But inside, you're still here, steeped in silence, carried by steam. So now, just rest your hands in your lap and breathe out softly. The leaves have settled. The pot is cooling. And the quiet you've been sipping all evening is beginning to settle into your body like warmth after a long day. There's no need to think about how many dynasties we pass through. No need to hold on to names or scroll titles or the color of the glaze. They've all done their part. They've steeped into you gently, without any demand to remember them precisely. The tea did what it always does. It slowed you down. Let yourself feel the last hints of steam, ghosting upward from a memory of a cup. Let the stillness that hung between sips drift into your chest. A quiet pause, long and even, somewhere in a mountain temple. A kettle hums faintly. In a scholar's courtyard, a pot is lifted. On a dusty roadside, another hand pours again for a friend, for a stranger, for no one in particular. It's all still happening, still brewing, still steeping. Let your body grow heavier now. Let the warmth settle in your shoulders, your chest, your fingertips. You don't need to reach for anything. Not tonight. Close your eyes. The water has cooled. The leaves are done. The silence is yours.